our speaker today is Randall Eck. He is one of our former UBRP participants, and he is very unique in the sense that he was involved in many aspects of UBRP while he was here. So Randall started at the U of A in 2016, and then he joined UBRP in 2017 with the Pros Come Up program that we had back then. That was our international program we had, which enabled Randall to do research at the Czech Academy of Sciences in the Czech Republic. He was involved in UBRP after that, also as a Beckman Scholar in 2018 and 2019, and worked in the lab of Daniela Zernescu in molecular and cellular biology. Randall was also really involved in UBRP. He was a small group leader, a pen pals coordinator. He was one of our Galileo Circle Scholarship awardees. He was just really involved, which is wonderful. And he wrote lots of press releases. So he has been in your shoes and he knows what it feels like to have to do this activity. Randall was also a writer for the Arizona Daily Wildcat from 2016 to 2020, his whole time here at the U of A. And that's the other reason why I wanted him to come. He has an extensive background in journalism and has written much more than what he needed to for UBRP and is going to be giving you lots of good tips. Randall did graduate in May of 2020 with his Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience, as well as his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. And he was named Outstanding Senior by the Department of Neuroscience for his fabulous research. Randall then decided that he wanted to continue in neuroscience and is now at graduate school at the University of Washington in Seattle. He did receive honorable mention for his NSF GRFP proposal. You guys should all know what that is from our last seminar. And currently has, I think, 2 publications fully under his belt and 1 that's in process. And so he's doing great. So it is my very great pleasure to have Randall here today to talk with you about writing press releases and to help you through the process of writing one and answering questions you have. So Randall, thank you so very much for taking time to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the great introduction. As Jen and Marissa introduced, I'll be giving you a primer on how to write and distribute an effective scientific press release. A little bit about my journey. I'll browse through this quickly because Jen talked about it a lot. I was in the Pros Come Up program through UBRP, where I'm also a Beckman Scholar. Something Jen did not mention, but I'm very proud of still. I was a salsa champ during one of the UBRP summers during the normal times. And now I am a neuroscience PhD student at the University of Washington. So why should you listen to me talk about press releases? Well, I think one of the biggest reasons is that my press release, when I was in UBRP, was published in my local newspaper. My parents still have it hanging on their fridge, and I hope you all can also have that happen with your press release. I think that's the big goal of this activity. I also wrote 150 articles about the science happening at the University of Arizona for the Daily Wildcat. So I know a bit about science writing, although I'm still always looking to improve. I highlighted some of my favorite articles here on the right, but there have been some crazy ones as well. Okay, so moving to the next slide. So I want to, try to demonstrate how important, communicating with journalists and writing press releases are in terms of the impact it can have on society and trust in science. And so I want to do a little Kahoot with you all and see how many of you can get all 4 of these questions right. But I'm going to set that up and then share my screen and we can all jump into that. The first question here. Approximately how many public tax dollars are given to university research each year? 500 million, 5 billion, 30 billion, or 100 billion? You got that here? We'll discuss them at the end. What percentage of US adults oppose the use of animal models in scientific research? 14%, 37%, 52%, or a vast majority at 73%? Okay. A little higher than you all suspected. Let's move on to the third question here. How many members of Congress, the previous Congress from 2 years ago, had backgrounds in STEM? 11, 37, 78, or 210? It was a survey, so they were asked to self-identify. Okay, a little higher than you all suspected, but still very, very low considering the total number of members of Congress. And now our final question here. What percentage of Americans do not plan to receive a COVID-19 vaccine? Okay, most of you got that right. I think that has been in the news a lot. So that exercise was, I think, to just show you how important communicating your science, what you're doing in the lab with the public is. The majority, every single one of your research labs receives tax dollars in funding. And those tax dollars are predicated on public support for your scientific research. If you can't communicate to the public what you're doing inside your lab, it won't get funded. And I think, the media, which reaches millions and millions and millions of people a day, more than Twitter still, is a great way, a great avenue by which to share your scientific results. And so being able to write a press release and communicate with journalists, I think is very important. I think the majority of you use some type of animal model in your research, unless you're working with human studies or in cell culture. The majority of Americans would want to shut down your lab if you work with rats or mice, no matter what you study, based on a Pew Research survey from 2 years ago. Communicating how we ethically treat animals and the importance of using animal models in our research is something that the science community, apparently, from this survey results, has really failed to do. Again, members of Congress regulate what science we can do in the lab and ban some science that we can do in the lab. And they also appropriate the funding that funds our lab. And so that only 37%, that only 37 out of 535 have a background in STEM means that it's even more difficult to communicate science concepts to members of Congress, but it is even more important. And then, as I'm sure you've all heard a lot about, there's a mistrust of scientists and the vaccine. And I think that is because of many reasons, but I think scientists failing to be good communicators is one of them. So I think, not only is it great to get your press release published and get it hung on your fridge, being a good science communicator is integral to your career as a scientist. And in that vein, I have a Stephen Hawking's quote that I particularly like and think is appropriate for this press release seminar. Not only is it important to ask questions and find the answers, as a scientist, I felt obligated to communicate with the world what we were learning. And I definitely agree with him here. So most of you will be asking yourself, what am I supposed to write my science press release about? Especially if this is your first summer in UBRP, you've been in the lab maybe 8 or 10 weeks during a summer when you probably can't work your full 35 hours at the lab bench. So I'm sure you all have made amazing and groundbreaking discoveries already. Am I right? No, of course not. And no one expects you to. But I would say a lot of science press releases are framed in one of these 4 ways. They talk about an amazing discovery. I think in your case, you should write about the research you are doing in your lab and its impact, even if you haven't had an amazing discovery. A lot of science articles you read in the news take the second frame here. Someone has received an award or the university has received a grant. And the article really focuses around this theme. You all are a part of UBRP. It's a pretty prestigious organization. Not everyone who applies gets in. I think you could frame your press release as your experience in UBRP. I think a personal journey is also a great way to frame a science article. Inspire the next generation of scientists to show by showing your own journey and your own path, and that all scientists are not old white men who no one can understand when they talk. And then the last framing here that I'm sure you have seen more and more recently is if your research relates to public health or the environment, make a recommendation in your press release or as your press release based on your current scientific research. There are people on campus studying the spread of buffalo grass in Tucson, Arizona. If there's a strategy to control buffalo grass that you have found effective in your research and you go on to publish it, write a press release turning that scientific paper into a recommendation for your neighbors. So I think these are the 4 frames or themes you can choose to write your scientific press release on. I think a good scientific press release from a UBRPer will touch on maybe 1 or 2 of these. But as I'll talk later, you want to make sure you stay focused. So we'll do a little activity later while I ask you to kind of think about what you'll be writing your press release about. But these are the 4 major themes you'll see from most science articles you read in the news. Yes, the PowerPoint will be sent out after the meeting. So here are just some examples. I pulled some Daily Wildcat headlines, which is the U of A newspaper, if you don't know. We have a great police beat. That's very funny. We post on Facebook. So an amazing discovery. UA scientists discover a new role for a protein involved in neurodegeneration. This is, a new scientific discovery, something interesting that the public wants to know about. An award or grant. UA professors receive $1.4 million to study motive and movement of refugees. You could write about being awarded in UBRP, a personal journey, marriage of ideas, husband and wife team up to combat opioid epidemic. These are the Kanas on North Campus who started a company to fight the opioid epidemic with non-opioid pain relievers. And then a recommendation, father cautions UA graduate students not to be blinded by prestige or money. Sadly, this father's son died in a clinical trial that was mismanaged. So here are some examples of what you can write your scientific press release about, because that is the most challenging part when you first sit down to write. What are you going to include? And so I hope you thinking about these 4 frames helps you. So now I kind of want to have you all jump in the chat over here, and I asked your small group leaders to have you just read one scientific article in the news, and I'd love if some of you could put in the chat maybe some things you noticed about how a science article in a newspaper is different from a scientific paper that you read in lab, or a scientific abstract that you wrote previously this summer. What's the difference you noticed, or some of the differences you noticed in the two? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of comments here. Much easier to read, less jargon, lots of analogies. Yes, accessible. Okay, let's see if we can get a few more human focused. I agree. I think everyone's research can be, has quotations. That's a very important one. Often a little more sensational. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little later. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing some really good ones here. I think some of you may have reviewed the guide I sent out already. Okay, I'm liking this. I hope you all read some interesting articles. Okay, so we'll close this discussion here in the comments and move on. And so I think the main thing you all pointed out is, yes, avoid jargon. And I think one of the easiest ways you can do that, as I think someone mentioned here in the comments, is instead of talking about how you're doing the research, talk about the impact of your research. Definitely talk about what you're doing in lab, but don't focus on the specific techniques and the details there. I've read press releases in the past that try to describe what a Western blot is, or a PCR. And while that is definitely important to include in a scientific paper, trying to explain those technical concepts to a general audience, it will leave them confused. I think it's important to talk about the impact of your research and how you're doing it, but don't get into the details of the technical methods. I also think when you introduce science terminology, even protein, give a metaphor to help people understand. Not everyone's grandma or grandfather will know what a protein is. So you can classify it as a cellular machine, or DNA. Make a note, this is the genetic material. Yeah, that will really help people. So don't shy away from the complexity of your research, but don't get bogged down in the technical details of your methods or in the scientific jargon. And I think that will really help make your article accessible, and is probably the most important thing, other than picking a strong theme that you want to focus on. As I mentioned a little bit, use metaphors. Try to explain the concepts behind your research in plain language, and that relates to everyday life. And I think a lot of you in the comments pointed out that scientific news articles do tend to focus on this. Now, there are a few other stylistic requirements of writing a press release. And I think if you follow these requirements, you have a much likelier chance of getting published in a local newspaper and people learning about you and your science. And so some of you did point this out, that science articles in newspapers are written very, very differently than science articles in scientific journals. They are written in the third person, and UBRP does ask you to write your press release in the third person. Don't use I. I think another important thing is use short paragraphs. As some of you pointed out, scientific articles can have, paragraphs that are thousands of words long. In a press release, you will want your paragraphs to be only 1 to 2 sentences. You are writing in the third person. And so when you want to include a quote from yourself, you should do so in the third person. And I'm also asking you, I think, to have a real good shot at getting a press release published, to include not only direct quotes from yourself, talking about your research or your experience in UBRP or your journey in science, but also from your mentor or PI, maybe a graduate student in the lab, maybe someone else who is familiar with your research. And then the last stylistic requirement here that I notice people often miss when writing their UBRP press release is they use their first name and everyone else's first name as they continue to write the article. The style in journalism is to only use people's last names after you first introduce them with their title. So in the beginning of my article, I would say Randall Eck, a graduate student at the University of Washington, et cetera, et cetera. And then as I refer to myself later on, I would just refer to myself as Eck. And so I think, following these 4 guidelines here will make your press release look extremely professional and increase the likelihood it is published. So here is a sample press release I wrote for the last lecture I gave on press releases back in 2019. And it has some of the requirements I mentioned on the last page. Also some things we'll talk about later. So everyone's press release should start with an eye-catching headline, and we'll talk about writing those a little bit later. I think the most important thing from this slide is you should include your contact information on the press release. If the goal is to have this press release turned into an article, they need to be able to contact you. So it should be prominent and included. The first sentence of your press release should be a very captivating, and what we call in journalism, it's our captivating lead. And we'll talk about writing that a little later. As you can see, we have very short paragraphs here, 1 sentence each, in fact. And this is the style of the articles you probably read and what I'm asking you to do today. There are direct quotes. I use the third person and I refer to people by their last names. And there are photographs included as well, and also links to any publications I may mention about my research. So these are the requirements of the UBRP press release. And in the UBRP press release guide that I think I made and you all have received, there is a checklist that kind of helps you remember some of these things. I just wanted to point them out on the slide here. And so now I want Marissa to send you all into breakout rooms. But before we do that, I want to switch my share and share another document here. I hope you all have access to the press release guide I made. If not, it should be on the screen now. In this breakout room with a few students, I would like you all to just jot down a few notes trying to answer these 3 questions I have on the left sidebar here. What is the theme of your article going to be? Are you going to talk about the research you're doing? Are you going to talk about your journey in science? Are you going to talk about receiving the UBRP award and what it is and kind of what you're doing with it, which also draws back on the science a little bit? Describe, the topics you're going to cover. I want you to pick 1 or 2 metaphors about your scientific project that you can come up with right now. They don't have to be your final metaphors, but I just want you thinking of some analogies you can use for some of the terminology or some of the stuff you are doing in lab. And then I just want you to jot the names down of who else you're going to quote in the article, other than writing direct quotes from yourself in the third person. So I want you all to go into breakout rooms, maybe discuss with the other people there and jot down a few notes on some of these. And I'll ask for some people to share when we come back and discuss a little more before we go on and talk about and practice maybe writing headlines and leads and some other things about the article. But I think these are the topics we covered so far. So if you could all go into breakout rooms. Yep, it looks like you can join now. Welcome back from your breakout rooms, everyone. Would anyone like to type in the chat maybe what frame they chose for their article? A phrase about your scientific research, or if you're talking about your personal journey, maybe a few words about that. Just throw it in the chat here and I'll read a few out and discuss. I'll give you all a few seconds to do that. A more active metabolism can be beneficial for ALS patients. I know that lab. That's the Zarnesky lab. That's a good topic to focus on. You very much chose the framing of I'm going to talk about my scientific research and maybe even almost rake a public health recommendation, although you want to be careful with that. Oh, animal models in addiction research. Yeah, I think that is also very cool. We talked about a little bit before how half of Americans don't support animals in research. And I think especially in addiction research, that can be very, very helpful. Moving on to that second question I had there. What are some metaphors you all were thinking of using, or maybe even just some jargony terms or specific things about your research you think require metaphors, even if you haven't come up with one yet? Engineering student dipping into biology research. That's a very good framing, Vanessa. Like personal journey could be, I think we're all as researchers a bit of engineers, although I've definitely duct taped things in the labs. Okay, any places where you need metaphors, viral knockdowns are like turning out the lights. I really like that. Gene conservation to car parts and evolution. That's a very, very good analogy. I like that. Ion channels and neurons being like doors. Yes. Even some of these simple concepts, you definitely want to use metaphors for. Alleles of genes like different flavors. Okay, that's a really good one. I definitely think in your small group sessions, if you find a hard concept to explain, definitely workshop it because you all are having some good ideas here. Okay, and then that third question, I kind of had you all workshop together on the worksheet. Who else are you going to quote other than yourself? I'm sure you could all probably write your PI down, but did any of you come up with someone else you know in your research lab, a grad student, or someone else that you know of that you could maybe include quotes from in your article because it relates to maybe your personal journey, they know you, or they know about your research? Does anyone have a patient? You definitely would want written consent as well. Otherwise, that would actually be a HIPAA violation. Other undergraduate students in UBRP, yes, for sure. A grad student who helped you troubleshoot, I think that's a great idea. Postdocs in your lab, also very helpful, maybe more accessible than your PI, depending on the size of your lab or what your PI is up to, if they're writing a grant or something. I like the husband, Elizabeth. I think that's a good idea too. Okay, so I'm liking all these ideas. So I'm glad you all had that opportunity to kind of think about what you're writing your press release about, how you're going to describe your research in a way that's effective, and who else you're going to quote. And that's the big bulk of planning out your press release. And now that you kind of have those three questions answered, you can get down to writing. And so I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks for actually constructing the press release now that we kind of all have our footings. Every scientific article uses the inverted pyramid structure. And I don't think any of you pointed out this earlier in the chat, but all press release articles, all newspaper articles will start with an attention-grabbing first sentence. And that is the lead. And we'll talk a little bit about how to write that. And then next, you have the body of your article. You want to include the major takeaways right away. If you're talking about your research, include the big, broad impacts of what you're doing. And then as you go farther down in the article, you can get into the details. Add the complexity towards the end. Talk more about your personal journey and those details after you have talked about the broad strokes in the body. This is because most people don't read all the way to the end. And so you want to put the most important things first after you grab everyone's attention. So there are many, many different types of leads. There's a straight news lead, which is a very who, what, when, where, why. You at the University of Arizona are doing this research with UBRP, etc. Then there's other more creative types of leads that can, I think, really draw your readers in. An anecdotal lead, which is very much storytelling, a scene setting lead, maybe describing a problem or the lab, an observational lead, which can also be very story-like. I think you can definitely choose any of these to write your UBRP press release. And I think the UBRP press release guide, if you scroll down to the articles written about UBRP students or the press releases written by past UBRPers, you'll see some different types of leads here. Let me give you an example of a good lead and a bad lead. I think this lead from the New York Times is very, very good. For half the year, a little brown bird on the northernmost island of the Galapagos uses its wickedly sharp beak to pick at seeds, nectar, and insects. But when the climate dries out, it drinks blood. So this bird becomes a cannibal. Oh, yeah, that's what I assume. I got to read on. And I think this lead not only talks about scientific concepts of, resiliency in the face of climate change. It does a scene setting lead where it talks about and gives this visual imagery of the bird and the island. It just really wants you you can't not read on in this article. It really grabs your attention. And so I think some things that you all could take from this lead specifically is definitely mention the scientific concept, maybe leave a bit of a cliffhanger, use visual imagery to get your readers interested in your research. I think those are all lessons you can take away. And now we have a bad lead over here. The whole dress that melted the internet thing has brought back a curious example of semi-demi science about a Namibian tribe that can't distinguish between green and blue. So that last part there, seems to be related to science. This is a science article, but the use of non-existent terms and the word thing and the confusing reference to a meme, I would recommend avoiding those types of things. I think, as well as avoiding jargon, you want to be clear and concise. They tried to bring something in from popular culture to make their science article interesting, but it really falls flat here. So I would much lean to describing with visual imagery and maybe leaving a cliffhanger or bringing up an interesting concept that you will explore later as a good lead, and not trying to make a pop culture reference like this news article did over here on the right. After you've written your first sentence, you have to write the body and tail of your article. And that's going to be really focused on your theme. And so I'm not going to go into the details of how to write every sentence after your first one, but I do want to give you some tips to keep readers engaged, keep the journalists reading your press release engaged and wanting to contact you and turn you into a story that gets published in their newspaper and that you can have forever, and also use as an avenue to communicate your science. So I would say stay focused. I said maybe include 1 and 2 of those themes, but try to keep on your topic and don't veer off. Every sentence you write should support your theme. Again, I'm going to reiterate, avoid jargon. Don't shy away from complexity towards the end of the article for sure, but definitely include the major concepts first and describe them in plain language. Here's another thing, a quote balance. This is a little more complex, but you don't want to include like 4 quotes right in a row from yourself and other people you are quoting in the article. You want to have a bit of a balance. You direct quote yourself, and then you have a couple 1 to 2 sentence paragraphs in between. You don't want your entire article to just be a quote. It should be a good balance. And then last here is don't include fluff. I know the UBRP requirements for the press release are about 600 words. If you can't make 600 words, that's okay. Maybe talk to your peers, see if you can find some ideas on how to add some more details here and there, but don't include fluff if you can't reach the word limit. It's better to be a little shorter at 400 words than to include excess descriptions that will really distract the reader and make your press release less appealing to turn into a full article, or even just share generally with your family and friends. After writing your lead and writing your body based on some of those tips I just gave you about your theme and including quotes and metaphors, now the last thing you want to do is write a headline. And a headline has to be clear, concise, and honest. And in our discussion earlier in the chat of the science articles you all read, a few of you pointed out that science articles can tend to be clickbaity or overstate their results. The more people who click on an article, the more money news organizations make. That's not how it works in science. The more people that read your scientific paper, you don't make any more money about it. You want people to read your scientific paper, but you want to be honest about your results and not overstate your conclusions just to get people to read, because that is disingenuous and unethical. And so I think the challenge of writing a headline is to be very interesting, just like your lead, but not to use any clickbait. So I'll give you some examples of some good and bad headlines here as they relate to science, I think, to help guide you on your way. Here are 4 headlines here. Sugar as addictive as cocaine. Obviously, they are citing a scientific study in this article that tries to argue this, but the scientific study contains many, many caveats. This headline just doesn't capture. So I would say this headline is a little clickbaity and misleading. Arnold Smith awarded for amazing new discovery in biology. New discovery in biology is a little vague. It's not going to draw readers in. I think Arnold Smith is also extremely vague. No offense, no one in the public knows who you are. No one in the public knows who any biologist is, maybe except for 1 or 2. So headlines usually don't use people's names unless they're celebrities. Instead, a better phrasing of this would be UA researcher or team of researchers discovers this. And then in the article, of course, you introduce everyone who was involved, but not in the headline. I think this is a really good article from UA News. UA researchers awarded $3 million grant to study genomics and cerebral palsy. You automatically know the theme of the article. They're talking about an award. You know that UA researchers are involved, and you know the scientific concept that's going to be explored. So you talk about the science, you talk about the framing, you talk about the who and why you may be interested to read this article if you're from Arizona. And then this last one here, I've seen this headline many times, cure for Alzheimer's discovered, and it never seems to pan out. This definitely overstates the scientific conclusions. A little more applicable to you all as UBRPers, here are 3 headlines of UBRPers when their scientific press releases were eventually published. So we have the first headline here: researchers hope to combat the spread of an invasive grass species. This profiled a student doing UBRP research. The second one here: communication is key for people and for cells. This again profiled a UBRP student doing cell communication research, mostly with a focus on cancer. And then this last one here: some cancer treatments could sacrifice pain relief, UA researchers find. So I think this middle one here is a play on a metaphor. It's interesting. It still mentions the science. You want to read more. And these other ones as well. Buffalo grass is a big problem in Tucson. This article would be interesting to anyone there, as well as this last scientific study here. I think writing the headline may be the hardest part of your article after you think of your initial theme and what you're going to write it on. So I recommend writing a few and workshopping it in your small group. But just make sure you try to be clear, concise, and honest. I think those are just as important as being really interesting. The place to really capture readers is your first sentence. Photo taking. Now that you have written your press release, in the last 5 minutes and written your headline, you want to include photos. This will be what entices journalists to publish you, because they will include these same photos in their article. And just generally, photos are a very important part of newspapers. So how do you take a good photo? I'll just give you some tips and tricks. I know everyone has Instagram nowadays, as this photo is on mine. As everyone should be good here, but there are some things I'd like to point out. You want your photo to be in focus, good lighting, at a medium distance, visually interesting. I am pipetting something here that's colorful. It's not something we actually do in the lab, but it's visually interesting. I'd like to, at this stage, mention thank you, Marissa, for taking this wonderful photo of me. I use it in all my science photo needs now. And I think horizontal photos are generally better to crop than vertical photos. So if you all are going into the lab, in the back of your mind, you'd be thinking, I need to ask a lab mate to take a photo of me doing some science to include with my press release, because that will really tie it all together and is a requirement for UBRP submission. Along with the photo, you maybe write a short description of what you're doing. Make sure your face is visible as well. That's important to mention. And also, photos are forever. So if you are required to wear safety gear in lab, but you normally don't for whatever reason, please wear it in the photo. That is a very important one. This is an example of a bad photo. So editing. So you all will be taking your press release to your small group. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what you all should be focusing on when you read your peers' work and also seek your press release to be edited. So the more people who read your press release, the better. They will be able to pinpoint where they are confused, where you may not be able to see that you have written something confusing because you're so used to working with the field and the research. So the more eyes, the better. And ask the people reviewing your press release, are you confused anywhere? And if they are, those are the places where you can add in some more metaphors or do some different descriptions. Typos and format, the press release checklist I gave you kind of covers the different formats I've introduced here. So, try to follow those format guidelines, check off the check sheet, and also look for typos. You don't want to have anything misspelled, especially people's names. And lastly, as Jennifer talked about in the beginning, you need to get your mentor's approval before sending it off. Your mentor has to approve it as part of UBRP submission, and maybe they don't want you to send your press release off because the research is about to be published and they are afraid of getting scooped or something to that regard. So definitely you need your mentor's approval and maybe quotes from your mentor as well and bring them in on the process. I have a few more slides, but I just want to reiterate the goal of the press release. I think the goal of the press release is to get published in a local newspaper about you and your science and that you can hang on your fridge. I think it's also to develop good communication skills. It is so important that you, as people doing scientific research, want to and go out and talk to the public about your work. The public funds your work impacts the public. They should be able to know and understand what's going on in your research labs. And I think, communicating with journalists about your work gives you a very broad general audience through which to talk about your research and share your research. And so on the press release guide worksheet included in that document sent to you, there's the little part at the bottom where I ask you to identify the email address of a journalist at your local newspaper or in Tucson in Arizona who you will send your press release to after it gets approved by your mentor, because I'd really like to see all of these published. In addition to that, I would like you all to send your scientific press release to the Daily Wildcat at news@dailywildcat.com. The Daily Wildcat's focus is on covering students. We have a science desk that covers science on campus. You are students doing science. Those articles work perfectly with our mission. And many UBRP students have been profiled in the Daily Wildcat. So send your press release after it's approved to the Daily Wildcat and to your local journalists, because then maybe you'll get published. But at the very least, I think you will learn valuable skills trying to put pen to paper, talking about your research to a general audience in this new format. Before I ask if you all have any questions, I have one more slide I want to pinpoint, but I want to thank you all for inviting me to speak today. And if you want another pair of eyes on your press release, definitely email me at my UW email. I want to just shout out another organization I'm a part of, Project Short. You all will probably be applying to med school, grad school, master's programs, or something of the sort. And Project Short is a new nonprofit organization that will help review your personal statement, not just once, but over multiple revisions, and practice interview skills with you for grad school or med school interviews. I'm one of their neuroscience PhD mentors, but they have mentors who are students and professors in literally every PhD subject area you would want to apply to, med school, and pharmacology and beyond. So if you are thinking about applying to grad school and med school, or you are applying to grad school and med school, and you want another pair of eyes on your application, definitely fill out the application form to get assigned a mentor. It's a great organization, and I definitely recommend the more people who can read your press release as well as your applications, the better they turn out in the end. So this is Project Short. I think Marissa and Jen will also maybe feature the link in future update emails. And if any of you have any questions, you can definitely follow up with me or my material. I'll send out this PowerPoint later today, as well as with my email. See, one question I want to address really quick.
Perfect.
Do you need to cite any sources talking about background information in your article? It's not like a scientific paper where you want to cite your scientific sources, but if you do mention a study or a statistic, then you would. But otherwise, you can talk about the general concepts without citing specific scientific papers.
If you don't mind, I have a really quick question. How much does a publication typically change what you wrote in your original press release? Like how much kind of does the Daily Wildcat or a different publication, how much do they change what you wrote?
It really depends. I think most UBRP press releases that are turned into articles are very human interest stories, talking about, oh, look at this cool thing the student's doing. So if you spend a lot of time focusing on your really cool research and the impact of your research, when it does eventually get published in a local newspaper, they may rewrite to focus more on you. My press release, they included direct quotes that I had from my press release and direct paragraphs I personally wrote in the final article that was written about me. But they also had a whole first and last section that I did not write at all. It was all the journalists asking me follow-up questions and writing that themselves. So I would say it really depends, but sometimes they will pull directly and just republish, but they will never just publish your press release. There will always be some follow-up with you and probably reframing depending on the context. At the Daily Wildcat, they will completely rewrite it. But at some of your local newspapers who are understaffed, they may do a half and half job, kind of like me.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And the last point I'll make as well is that for the UBRP press release, we're looking for 800 words maximum. So as Randall mentioned, don't feel like you have to cram in extra stuff just to meet that limit. It's not really a lower limit, it's an upper limit.